Hello. Over the last year, we've seen the following. Stephen Paddock kill 58 people and injure nearly 500 others at a Las Vegas country music concert. John Robert Newman kill 5 former coworkers before killing himself in Orange County, Florida. UPS driver Jimmy Lamb shoot 3 coworkers at a meeting with a stolen pistol. Left-wing activist James Hodgkinson non-fatally shoot Republican Majority Whip Steve Scalise and 3 others in Virginia. And Iraq War veteran Esteban Santiago, reportedly delusional, kill 5 and injure 6 at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. Following mass shootings, cries for common sense gun control are shouted all over Facebook, the media, and ordinary conversation before the bodies grow cold. So-called common sense measures might include national gun registries, mandatory psychological assessments of gun owners, bans on magazines capable of holding more than 10 or of more than 5 cartridges, a return to the 1994 assault weapons ban, and even repeal of the Second Amendment. However, mass shootings account for a small fraction of overall gun deaths in America, with so-called assault weapons accounting for few gun deaths. Behind calls to limit weapons access is the presumption that more guns mean more gun violence. Behind calls for less restriction often lies the presumption that more guns will mean less gun violence. Both suppositions are false. Guns per capita do not predict gun violence. My argument is simple. We should be skeptical of restrictions on freedom that cannot be clearly connected to the common good. Second, so-called common sense gun measures are restrictions on freedom that cannot be connected to the common good. Therefore, we should be skeptical of common sense gun control measures. Some understandings of the common good will allow for greater restrictions than others. For example, a natural law conception of human nature and governance will allow for a greater range of restrictions in general than a libertarian theory of governance. However, I will not define human nature or the common good in any detail here. Instead, I will rest mainly on the assumption that limiting unnecessary harm is wrapped up in the common good as a legitimate end of government. I will preface the discussion today with some remarks on gun violence in America. It is easy to point out that there are approximately 33,000 annual gun deaths in America each year. Merely citing the 33,000 number gives the impression that about 33,000 people are feloniously killed each year, but this is false. About 2/3 of all gun deaths are suicides. Now don't get me wrong, suicide is very bad. A man I was friends with in college killed himself with a handgun. What we might think of as the scary number, though, is closer to 11,000 gun-related deaths annually. In fact, the CDC reported 11,008 non-suicide firearm deaths in 2014. At this point, one might think that 11,000 are feloniously killed each year, which is still really high. However, this is too quick. Consider this partial breakdown of verified gun violence in 2014 as compiled by the Gun Violence Archive, whose inclusive definition of gun violence may account for the discrepancy with the CDC over total gun deaths. Non-suicide gun deaths, as accounted by the Gun Violence Archive, come to 12,569. Mass shooting deaths, which are included there, are only 273. Officer-involved shooting, where the officer is shot or killed, 261. Officer-involved shooting, where the suspect is shot or killed, 1,775. People killed during the course of a home invasion, 2,619. Shootings in self-defense, 1,591, and unintentional shootings, 1,607. Now I should note that the numbers from officer-involved shootings on down may indicate deaths, injuries, or threats. Still, police shooting and self-defense account for quite a large number, 3,366 incidents overall. At any rate, University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation established the firearm homicide rate in the United States at 3.85 per 100,000. And again, those are just firearm-related homicides. We'll get to overall homicide numbers in a moment. Gun control advocates often presume that more guns per capita mean more gun violence. Gun boosters often counter with the crime deterrent effect of armed citizens, behind which lies the presumption that the more guns per capita, the less gun violence. If the gun control presumption is correct, we will see lower rates of gun deaths where guns are least plentiful. If the gun advocate claim is correct, we will see higher rates of gun deaths where guns are least plentiful. But neither is the case. Criminologists Don Cates and Gary Mauser point out that the nearly gunless Soviet Union paralleled or exceeded gun-rich America's murder rate during the 1960s and 1970s. Current Russian law prohibits civilian gun ownership, with the exception of licensed hunters, resulting in about 4 guns per 100 people. America boasts 88 guns per 100, with some sources putting the number as high as 112 guns per 100 people. However, in 2002, Russia had an intentional homicide rate of 20.54 per 100,000, compared to America's rate of 5.6 per 100,000 that year. And Russia boasted a suicide rate 4 times higher than America's. And the 2002 figures are not remarkable for either country. There are also countries in which guns are not uncommon, but in which violent gun deaths are very low. Consider countries with relatively high gun density, say over 20 guns per 100 people. And so in the numbers I'm about to read, for high gun density countries, the homicide rate is per 100,000 and the gun density rate is per 100. So, in America, the homicide rate in 2002 was 5.6, with 88 guns. Finland was 1.98, with 39 guns. Norway was 0.81, with 36 guns. France was 1.65, with 30 guns. Germany, 0.93, with 30 guns per 100 again. Sweden with 1.87 homicide rate and 24 guns per 100 people. Compared to countries with with low gun density, which I'm defining as fewer than 20 guns per 100 people. Thus, Denmark clocks a homicide rate of 1.21 per 100,000 with 19 guns per 100. Greece, 1.12 per 100,000 with 11 guns per 100. And Switzerland with a homicide rate of 0.99 per 100,000 with 16 guns per 100. Interestingly, high gun density Germany and Norway still have lower homicide rates than low gun density Denmark, Greece, and Switzerland. Moreover, if increased gun density causes murder rates to increase, then we should have seen America's murder rate steadily climb since 1968, when gun density was half of what it is now. However, after a brief rise, we see a sharp decline in murder, as shown in this chart here. Some will say that this means that increased gun density makes would-be murderers think twice. However, the numbers we have looked at don't support that claim either. More narrowly, one might say that guns cause gun crime. In a sense, this is right. Without guns, gun violence is impossible. Thus, a simple-minded arithmetician might subtract America's gun murder rate from the overall murder rate to yield a murder rate of 1.03. This would put us in line with the countries we were just looking at. This person might mention Japan's close to zero tolerance policy with respect to gun ownership, with only about 271,000 guns legally owned in a population of 127 million people, as reported in 2011. In 2014, there were a total of 6 firearms-related deaths and an overall murder rate of 0.31 per 100,000 in Japan. Surely, firearms should be enormously restricted or eliminated, right? However, as noted before, Germany has a gun density of 30 per 100, but in 2015 reported a murder rate of 0.85, with 0.12 per 100,000 of that being gun murder. This is far below America's overall murder rate of 4.88 per 100,000 and gun murder rate of 3.85 per 100,000 respectively. And again, I want to stress that 3.85 figure is included inside of the overall murder rate of 4.88. Moreover, El Salvador has a low gun density, 6 per 100 people, but a gun murder rate of 40.29 per 100,000, far above America's rate. Again, a definite connection between the number of guns and murder, even gun murder, proves elusive. I admit that I have not given the present issue a detailed statistical analysis. We might like to know what the correlational coefficient between guns per capita and gun crime is, or what kinds of guns, handguns versus long guns, for example, are prevalent in each country. However, the numbers do give us a prima facie case that increased gun density does not cause murder, or even gun murder, in any interesting sense of cause relevant to this debate. Similarly, these numbers provide a prima facie case that increasing guns per capita does not reduce murder or gun murder either. Yet, over 20,000 people kill themselves with guns each year, so suicide looms large. One might think that getting rid of guns will take a huge bite out of America's suicide rate. However, consider Japan again with its very few guns and suicide rate of 15.4 per 100,000 compared to America's rate of 12.6. So we can look at countries' suicide rates and the number of guns per 100 people again. Suicide rates, of course, per 100,000 people. America, suicide rate of 12.6, 88 guns per 100. Finland, 14.2 with 39 guns per 100. Denmark, 9.1 with 19 guns per 100. France, 12.3 with 30 guns per 100. Germany, suicide rate of 9.1 with 30 guns per 100. Sweden, a suicide rate of 12.7 with 24 guns per 100. And Japan, a suicide rate of 15.4 with 0.6 guns per 100 people. These numbers do not bode well for the claim that a reduction in guns causes a reduction in suicide. Again, I have not run statistical analysis to determine the actual correlational coefficient of gun density and suicide rates, nor have I looked at the distribution of different types of guns, but we do appear to have a prima facie case against the claim that increased gun density causes suicide. When it comes to guns and suicide, or guns and murder for that matter, other factors are probably in play. Some will claim that it is not the number of guns that is the problem per se, but lacks gun control. If we only had more gun control, the claim goes, measures restricting access to firearms other than outright bans, we would see less gun murder, and so less murder. However, parts of the United States with heavy gun restrictions often have more firearms murders than places with fewer restrictions. One need only look to the firearms data from Chicago. From 2010 to 2015, Chicago endured 450 to 500 murders per year, with the murder rate fluctuating between 15.1 and 18.5 per 100,000. In 2016, Chicago experienced 762 murders compared to 47 in the entire state of Idaho that year. And keep in mind, in 2016, Idaho made it legal for any 21-year-old to carry a concealed firearm statewide without a permit. For comparison, the murder rates in 2016 were 27.7 in Chicago and 2.8 in Idaho. Respectively, Detroit and St. Louis are considerably worse, with 2016 murder rates of 44.6 per 100,000, 59.2 per 100,000 respectively. To put this into perspective, the civilian death rate in Iraq during the 2007 troop surge was 62 per 100,000. Some will look at this data and conclude that gun control causes crime. However, as pointed out by Cates and Mauser, cities and countries with significant violence problems tend to implement gun control. Places without significant violence problems often do not implement gun control. This confounds causal claims we might make on the basis of the data that I've mentioned. At this point, someone will bring up Australia's 1997 gun buyback. The murder rate has fallen since that event, so clearly gun control works. Well, no. According to the Australian Institute of Criminology, the number of homicide incidents in Australia has been steadily decreasing since 1990, well before the gun buyback, and has continued in spite of the loosening of 1997's gun restrictions in recent years. To boldly claim that Australia's data shows the effectiveness of gun control without accounting for other explanations is a case of post hoc ergo propter hoc. Common sense gun regulation might not come to outright weapons bans. These regulations might be more focused. Some very foolish and uninformed people say we need to ban fully automatic weapons, but these have been banned since 1986. Others want to return to the 1994 federal assault weapons ban. So what then? A ban on semi-automatic rifles? High-capacity magazines, rifles with pistol grips or bayonet lugs? Even if such measures eliminated all mass shootings, we would still only see a gun murder reduction of 2% going by the Gun Violence Archive's numbers. Given the number of guns already in circulation, a 2% reduction looks far-fetched anyway, and one wonders whether gun confiscation is then the real aim here. Additionally, just as we witnessed a decrease in murder during the ban's duration, we have seen a decrease in murder since it expired as well. At the least, the weapons targeted by the federal assault weapons ban are not the weapons typically used in murder, and it isn't clear that measures targeting weapons that are typically used in murder, that is, handguns, are very effective anyway. If so-called common sense gun regulation is supposed to be aimed at gun murder reduction, then common sense measures, as I usually hear them touted, are of dubious effectiveness. Suppose we establish a national gun registry. What then? In Germany, police may inspect your home at any time to check that your guns are safely stored in a safe. Your gun license requires a psychiatric examination, and you may be called to undergo another examination at any time. I do not know whether this explains Germany's low incidence of gun crime or not. It's worth looking into. We need to know at least when these measures began and what Germany's crime trends were before and what they have been since. Germany's example does point to something that gets left out of American debate: focused measures aimed at violence reduction. Mental health may be a part of that, and we need to look at where gun violence is happening and why. The National Gang Center reports that 2,000 American murders every year between 2007 and 2012 were the result of gang violence. Detroit saw a murder rate of 63 per 100,000 during the 1987 crack wars. In high murder cities, violence is not evenly distributed. It may be focused in just a few neighborhoods that can have murder rates similar to the death rates in war zones. We also need to look at what motivates mass shootings. In the list I gave at the beginning, some were driven by political radicalization, and some by grievances at work. Sometimes no discernible motive may be found. Such shootings may be motivated by despair or nihilism. After all, when nothing has transcendent value, why not kill a bunch of people? It is possible that measures focused on real violence problems and problem areas may not involve gun control at all as we usually understand that. They may involve economic relief, distributivist economic policies, or the cultivation of moral and spiritual health beyond what the managerial and therapeutic outlook of the modern bureaucratic and technocratic state can accommodate. Heck, focused forms of gun control might even be justified in some cases. However, whatever they will involve, focused measures will probably require greater thought and effort than blanket bans on this or that in order to do something. I have argued that what are often touted as common sense gun control measures do not connect very well to the part of the common good concerned with the reduction of unnecessary harm. Admitting that my analysis is weakened by the absence of data on the kinds of guns in circulation, handguns versus long guns, I have offered a prima facie case that high gun density does not predict murder or gun murder, and that limiting or banning semi-automatic weapons or high-capacity magazines is of dubious usefulness. It is also not clear what those who want a federal firearms registry really intend by that. For these reasons, we should be skeptical of so-called common-sense gun control measures. Often, I think that what counts as common-sense gun control to a person is grounded in assumptions about who we should want to be, that is, about our ideals. It seems to me that for many Americans, the gun is symbolic of an identity forged in the English assize of arms of 1181, the American Revolution, and the rugged individualism of the frontier, including native defiance of European settlement. For American men in particular, being armed may not be so much about freedom as it is about honor and personal dignity as a provider and protector. To these men, calls for disarmament are an affront to their dignity as men in this culture. We might also point to the assumption underlying much of the gun debate that men and women have a right to a life from which is derived both a right to self-defense and a prima facie right to reasonable tools of self-defense, including, at least, handguns, as defended by Bernstein, Hsiao, and Palumbo in their paper, A Moral Right to Keep and Bear Firearms. Now, there are points of view that may not connect the right to life to the right of self-defense, or in which handguns do not count as a reasonable means. Still others disparage the idea of manhood informed by martial virtues, order of assize for the purpose of community defense, and the ideal of the rugged individual as toxic. But at this point, the gun control debate looks more and more connected to the culture war, and just as in other manifestations of that conflict, a hard look at the numbers is often insufficient to settle the debate, because the conflict is really over what values should prevail in our polity, and thus what values should shape us. As always, references are found in the video description. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Bye-bye.